Hi everyone. Can you hear me okay? I should say I don't think I'm one of the 50 leaders in my organisation, but that's another matter altogether. Elaine did a great job this morning, yeah? Elaine's one of the kind of leaders, along with a number of us in Greater Manchester and Manchester, that have really framed the whole ageing programme, and ageism has been a core part of that. And we've got a fantastic panel over the next 45 minutes, and what I want to do before I invite them up on stage and also sit in the right seat and handle a thing called Slido, which is news to me, is just say a few reflections on, I think, where we are in terms of the kind of ageism debate, because I think, from my point of view, there's a real paradox at play here. So on the one hand, and I'm sure you've heard from Sir Harper and many others over the last few hours, the change in demography, not just the UK but internationally. So you have this on the one hand. But on the other hand, I think in public policy making, a real lack of absence of any discussion of the impact of ageism, first of all on individuals, but secondly on services, and thirdly more broadly on our society. And this paradox has been going on has been at play for quite a long time. And as important as the debate is about the roots of ageism I just want to focus just a few thoughts on where we are in terms of policy making and how we develop leadership around the ageing and ageism agenda. Because I think on the one hand you've got a focus in health and social care on ageing, in the framework we've just heard about, which tends to focus on the oldest old and those in most need, and they've got a huge job there. And then on the other side of things, I think you've got what I would call public health orthodoxy, a public health gaze on this agenda, which I think has a kind of blind spot when it comes to later life in terms of investment and leadership and expertise. And in a way, I think ageism in public policy making is a victim, or the agenda is a victim to this lack of capacity, expertise, and leadership, more broadly on ageing. And I think the second paradox at play is that the private sector, the corporate sector, those involved in innovation, particularly in those sectors, over the last few years have actually been leading, I think, and making some of the biggest impact on how we think about ageing in a way that the public sector, I just don't think recently, for the last few years, has been equipped to do. One thing that we can predict is that things will change in terms of how we see older people and ageing. I think that is absolutely certain for all the reasons we've just heard about, and the leadership that people like Elaine and others give. But I think what is at play and what is important for us to do in this room is make sure that when those things start to move, that we've done the groundwork, that we've got the best analysis, the best arguments, and we give the best platform to older people, particularly those in marginalised and low-income communities. So I think there's lots to play for in the ageism debate. It's a difficult one. It's going to be central to what we do over the next decade or so, I think. And to set out, I think, what the framework for all that, if I can see, is Carol Easton, who's going to join us now. Now, Carol, I should admit, Carol is the third chief executive of Aging Better, Centre for Aging Better, that I've worked with. And she's doing a fantastic job in leading Aging Better into the future. And it's one of the national organisations that's making a huge difference on this agenda. So, Carol, if you want to come up and set out your thoughts and reflections.
Okay, I've got one of these. I think I'll do it here if I may. Is that all right? I thought we were all going to be sitting down, and I should just say, is this on? Is that one on? It's okay. I'll manage. But just Paul has worked, he said, with 3 chief execs at Aging Better, but I want to acknowledge I took over from Anna, as I have just now. So much of what the centre has achieved is down to her, not to me, because I've only been in post just over a year. But it's been an exciting year. And I I hope, you know, we're preaching to the converted here. You're all interested in ageing. I would be a bit brave and say you're all ageist. I don't think any one of us is actually immune from it. So I think we all have a responsibility to reflect, and I'll come back to that in a moment. I'm sure some of you all know that there's 11 million people aged over 65, which is now already 19% of the population, and that's going to go up to 22% of the population. And we know ageist attitudes are rife. And they're shocking statistics when you stop and think about it. If we say that 26% of people will say they've experienced prejudice on the grounds of age, 26%, that's 1 in 4 people. Half of people in society think society is ageist, and only a third will say they're looking forward to their old age. So we certainly have a very distorted view of ageing in this country. I've worked a lot of my career with children and young people, and I promise you they experience ageism too, but it most profoundly affects us as we get older. Ageism is unusual, and I've touched on it already. It's a prejudice against our future selves that potentially affects every single one of us. I don't think it's uncommon for any prejudice or any discrimination to be internalized, for people to denigrate themselves or deny themselves opportunities because they've internalized their other views of society. But the difference with ageism is unless you die young, everyone will get older. I'm sure, and I'm sorry because I wasn't here earlier, that you may have touched on the worrying consequences of ageism and ageist attitudes on physical, on mental health. So, for example, older people more likely to be prescribed antidepressants than talking therapies. There was a recent article too about access to breast cancer surgery and discrimination on the grounds of age. We have really ingrained assumptions that older workers are less competent or less capable of learning new skills. And that leads to people being forced out of the workforce or being passed over for job progression. We've got ageism in the media, in film, television, which is obvious, the kind of most obvious manifestation. So, is it just older people who are ageist? No, I think one of the most shocking quotes I heard recently, and I don't even know really who the Kardashians are, so forgive me if you do, or why they got famous, but there was this quote in the New York Times this year from Kim Kardashian. If you told me that I literally had to eat poop every single day and I would look younger, I might. I just might. Now, that's horrifying, isn't it? That kind of, she can say that and somehow that's acceptable. Ageist themes reduce people to stereotypes, but there isn't an inevitability about that. Aging is living. It's a lifelong process of growth. So, aging isn't the problem, is it? Ageism is. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. And I think we've got Hannah, who's going to join us from the University of Kent, who's doing some fascinating work on fashion and ageing.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're going to set out your reflections and thoughts.
Yeah. So I might as well stand here as well. So thank you very much. My name's Dr. Hannah Swift. I'm from the School of Psychology at the University of Kent. And I've been really lucky to do lots of research over the last year setting out exactly some of those statistics that Carol mentioned about how ageism is experienced, but also some of the consequences of age stereotypes. And now I'm kind of turning my attention into looking into what we can do about ageism. And one of the areas of which I thought I could make an impact and try and tackle is the area of fashion. So I thought, well, if I can tackle ageism in fashion, then pretty much that might be giving us some good things that we can learn, trying to challenge some of those norms, trying to challenge those stereotypes, challenge representations of age. And if we can do it in fashion, which is the most culturally challenging place to work, then maybe it might drift out and we might learn some things about how we can change some of these attitudes for the rest of society. So I was very lucky to be awarded a Catalyst Award for my project Redressing Ageism in Fashion, and I'm working with a fashion brand called The Bias Cut, who run an anti-ageism campaign called Ageism is Never in Style. So we're not trying to be an anti-ageism campaign, but what we're trying to do is actually talk to fashion brands about some of the challenges that they may face if they're trying to address and tackle ageism in fashion. I'm not going to go into too many details about what ageism in fashion looks like. There's a really nice report by the ILC, which I'm really grateful for, which does a lot of that, sets out a lot of issues around consumers, women over 50, particularly feeling like they're not catered for in the fashion industry. But I don't need to tell you that even if you open up a magazine or if I tell you about fashion, the instant things that come into your mind are probably anti-aging and also just a general kind of lack of representation of women and men as well, but mostly women over the age of 50 in the fashion industry. So one of the things that we set out to do is understand, well, if we want to challenge ageism and maybe diversify that imagery that we see, if we diversify that imagery, we might get challenge and get different views of of aging, different possibilities of things we can do in later life as well. But why would brands want to do this? They have a job to do. Their job is to sell clothes. If using younger models to do that does the job, then why would they want to change that? So one of the issues is about trying to educate brands about why they might want to diversify their imagery. We came out with 4 kind of huge challenges. One around, well, maybe there's just a lack of models. Is it actually that brands want to diversify their imagery, but when they go to modelling agencies, there aren't just any models over the age of X, right? So that's one of the things that we're looking into. We have found some really good modelling agencies, and we're talking to them about some of the challenges that they face as well. If you are a brand, how do you actually expand and think about trying to reach those pockets, older consumers, 50-plus consumers? How do you actually go about doing that whilst maintaining the integrity and the value of your brand? Because as soon as you start putting an image of somebody over 50 connected with that brand, that is it. Instantly your image and what that brand means and what people think of that brand can change, right? And that's because of our own inherent ageist attitudes as well. So that's got to be a challenge and something to look at. How do brands do age diversity without losing their kind of, we call it the cool factor? How do they maintain being cool? How do you use images that negate age stereotypes as well? How do you then break through and try and do this in a way that's not just tokenistic, but becomes a mainstream? So when we're walking down the high street, we see images of age diverse images all the time, without it just being a kind of a tokenistic thing. So these are some of the challenges that we've been looking at, and the first thing that we wanted to do is to talk to some fashion brands, some fashion houses, about whether or not they see these as problems. Are these just problems that we see, or do they have these problems as well? Are these actually, we wanted to validate these problems. So to do that, we first set up a website. And that was challenging in itself, because the first thing that we learned with our Catalyst Award funding is that to set up a website for your project to say that you're trying to tackle ageism in fashion, fashion brands aren't going to want to talk to you, because you're immediately calling them out on the one thing that we actually want to talk to them about. So we set ourselves up in a way in which we wanted to befriend the fashion brands. We wanted to help them. We want to help them see the value in aging. Challenge number 2. Imagery. Could we find any aesthetic pictures that represented our project? No, found it really, really difficult. Found it really difficult, even if you you Google fashion. Are there any images that actually come up with age diverse imagery? There are very few. Of those, how many of those can we use? Do we get the PI for? Very difficult. Which got us thinking into about something else, about not only fashion brands having problems with imagery, but also all the other kind of industries that work in fashion. So not just brands, because brands, they take pictures of the clothes and their products themselves, right? But what if you are in the industry, your PR, your social media, you're a marketer, your e-commerce, your modeling agency, brand management consultancy, market research, maybe all of the doing innovations in your business, and you want to reflect that you want to work with the fashion industry. So then we looked at those, and actually they have images of fashion. Are those images showing age diverse kind of fashion? No, they're showing fashion equals young, equals trendy. So even those kind of businesses are finding it hard to reflect the industry back to the fashion industry. We looked at Shutterstock as well, and we found that a lot of SMEs use these images on Shutterstock, for their websites. And if you're one of these brands that want to communicate that you're open to working with the industry, then you want to reflect that industry back in your own imagery that you're using. And only 8% of those brands are actually happy with the images that they use. So one of the things that we're looking at maybe is taking our project next is how we can actually change that. Now, the Centre for Aging Better have done some work around imagery, and they have a collection of images that, so they see this as a problem too. But fashion images have to have a certain kind of aesthetic, and that's what we're trying to tackle and look at next. So if anyone has experienced any of these issues in terms of imagery and branding, please do come and talk to me. Having the right aesthetic is key. We found that the fashion industry will only want to talk to us if we look and sound like the fashion industry. So our first challenge is actually setting ourselves up with some legitimacy in this space. And as a research project, UKR funded, it's a challenge within itself. So that's one of the things that we're working on. I've got lots more to say about ageism, but I'll leave it there for now. So please do ask us any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I was taken by your challenge that we've got to look like the fashion industry, George. There's a challenge for us there, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, Mebs, do you want to come and join us? Mebs Ramtouli is the founder and CEO of What's Next. He is a former pharmacist, businessman, entrepreneur, all-round amazing guy. And do you want to come and join us and give your reflections and thoughts on this agenda?
All right. Thank you. I thought it was going to be a panel discussion, but I'll do a 3-minute overview. I guess my perspective is slightly different. I grew up in England and then have been a traitor and emigrated to Canada some 35 years ago. So now I call myself a Canadian. The What's Next journey started actually with a personal story. I had run an advertising agency for 20 years, and at the age of 46, 47, I had the opportunity to exit. And one of my colleagues asked me what I was going to do next. And I thought that was such a silly question. I'd been working 70 hours a week for 17 years, and my idea of exiting was to travel around the world, spend time with friends and families, eat as much steaks as I could, and have a happy life. And so they kind of laughed at me and said, we're going to give you 3 months. Well, you know what, we'll be kind. We'll give you 6 months. You'll be climbing the walls in 6 months. And I thought on this score, they were absolutely wrong. Well, guess what? After a 4-month sabbatical of traveling around the world and spending time with friends and family, I came home on a Monday morning in April. I had been to the gym 2 hours this time, not 40 minutes because I had time. I had read the national newspaper, cover to cover. You could ask me any story. I could recite it backwards, forwards, and sideways. And I checked my 3 emails, not 300. And it was 11 o'clock in the morning. And I called my wife, and I said, do we need to vacuum the floor or anything? She said, no, we did that on Friday. I said, do we need to buy groceries? She said, no, we did that on Saturday. So I decided that I was going to make a difference and pick up my kids from school, who were 12 and 15 at the time. That was my wife's kind of special moment, because the drive from school to home was about an hour, and this was the special time with the mom. I go to the school and see these two young girls, and they drop their bags and start crying. And I thought, what's going on? And I said, where's Mom? And I said, she's at work. You know, we're going to see her at home. And in those days, if you remember, we had those large phones in the cars, like 18 inches long. And they insisted on calling their mother because they thought I had come to school to give them some bad news about their mother, because I had never picked them up. So I thought, this is interesting. I've exited a rather successful advertising agency business with a staff of 80 people, offices in 2 cities. I was a CEO on a Friday, and I was MEBS on a Monday. And I didn't actually articulate it as well as Professor Ibarra does, who is a professor at the London School of Business. She says, the amount of value that we attach to networks and relationships during full-time work cease on a Friday or a Saturday. And trying to recreate them is not easy. So what started as a rather inquiry, if you like, as to what do people do? Now, I was 46 years old. Actually, by that time, I was 50. And I said, I was so lucky. I had a wonderful family. I had good health. I had a few pounds in the bank. And I was going nuts. So what do people do? So that started a journey, talking to people like myself. And research that we've done, which many of you have probably been part of in other forms of life, have shown that people value this connection, communication, and sharing so much that when they lose that during this transition, it is actually quite traumatic. So what's next is being developed, although we're looking for funding. So if there's some investors in the room, please, let's talk. We're trying to create a community-based digital platform that will, number one, connect, communicate, and allow people to share their life stories and experiences through some activities. It may be going to a museum, it may be finding gig work or whatever, and then connecting them to opportunities for flexible work, giving back, and lifelong learning. These are the 3 pillars that our community has suggested that we develop. And so through this inquiry, we've now developed a community of about 1,400 members around the globe. And when people in Tokyo sit up at an event that we have hosted, which Anna Dixon was part of a few months ago, and Andrew J. Scott and Yvonne Sansino, it is really heartwarming that people are sitting up in Tokyo at 11:30 at night, their time, to listen to an hour of our discussions. So I think there's a need for people at this stage to be part of this. And what is really heartwarming, and my connections to George and the teams in the UK, including Anna, is that the work that you guys are doing in the UK is the worst kept secret. For goodness sake, can we take you on a roadshow around Canada, please, and have you share the amount of investment that you're making in the UK in this area is phenomenal and much needed. And I think the world needs to get there. And the United States, and I can certainly say for Canada, are not there. Yesterday, we sat through a conversation with Andrew Scott and Michael Gove and David Cameron, and just listening to how much they've been able to bring together the key stakeholders, government, policymakers, private businesses, academics together on this issue is just remarkable. So it's so refreshing. And the other observation I made today, looking at this room, the number of people under 40, under 45 is so refreshing. This is not an issue that is going to affect a segment of the population. It's going to affect us all. And I think the speakers before me have shared that with you. So we look forward to learning from you in the coming months and the years. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You just ruined my plan for retirement there. I've got exactly the same plan as well. Okay. One of the things I wanted to do really was to ask the panel members. We've got a couple of questions about fashion, by the way, that have come in, which we can pick up in a minute. But what are the things do you think are, what are the barriers around innovation to innovation that ageism creates. You know, what are the kind of things that you've spotted or that you see out there that are at play in this agenda? What do you think?
Well, first of all, I want to say, first of all, I'm surprised you don't think we do look like we're in the fashion industry.
Look at us.
I kind of don't quite get it, but we can discuss that another time. I mean, I think the first thing, before you can get onto innovation, it's about older people in the workplace. Yeah. And you touch on it, Nebs. I've got friends who kind of get cross with me because I'm still working. It's like I'm making them feel, kind of reflecting back to them that they're missing something, I think, and they get a bit angry with me. But I think, we know that, over 30% of people feel at a disadvantage applying for work, let alone joining teams where they can contribute their wisdom, their knowledge, and their innovation. And I would challenge you, I've spoken to older people who say if you use words innovation or entrepreneurial or enterprise, it's a euphemism for anyone preferably under 40 years of age. So I really do think we have to think about the language that we use as well, if we really want to be inclusive and make older people, and by that I mean over 50s, feel that they can still contribute and be part of this world. And I don't think it's surprising employers have ageist attitudes, because we've grown up, Mebs touches on it, don't you, with the model of retirement. And I would say retirement from paid work, because actually, right, you went to pick your kids up, right? We don't value sufficiently in this country, I think, unpaid work. So a lot of older women, myself included, we're doing childcare. That doesn't even contribute to GDP. We're looking after other older people. So we talk about retirement from paid work only. We need another language for retirement from unpaid work. But we need people to encourage older people to stay in the workplace. It's good for them. It creates innovation. It creates increased productivity. But at the moment, they don't feel welcome. And I think we all have a responsibility to do something about that.
I think, if I may just add on what Carol is saying, I think there are two broad areas where I think we're failing. One is the mindset. The mindset being that, we tend to think of aging as a kind of a negative aspect of life. And I think the teams in the UK and, Andrew's team as well, when you start talking about longevity, it creates a bit of enthusiasm in the discussions that we have. The second thing is around the narrative, as you said. We tend to think of old, decrepit 70-year-olds. No, we're not that. And I think we need to, and I think as seniors or as retirees or as middle-aged people, we've probably done it to ourselves. I make the mistake of sometimes going up the stairs and saying to my kids, well, the knees are hurting, I'm getting old. So we're doing it to ourselves in some ways. So.
I've been asked a couple of times this year, Paul, when are you retiring? Why are you hanging around for, And I'm in that age group where some of my friends now are retiring. I think one of the things that I've noticed, certainly post-COVID, is in public sector roles, I think people are knackered. I think we need to find ways to, encourage people who've got a huge amount of experience and organisational memory to find ways to stay in the workforce, so that we don't have to go through the same kind of discussions over and over again. I think finding ways for flexible working, for new forms of working as well, are super important, and from a public sector point of view, we have to lead the way, I think. I just wanted to move on to try, we've got about 10 minutes left, to try and look at some of the opportunities. Where are the opportunities for hope? What are the inroads to combat ageism? How are we going to break through into the mainstream? Before I just take colleagues in on that point, there is the opportunity for you to ask questions, and they will miraculously, and I can't quite work out, come to me on my computer. So if you've got any questions for the panel, you want to raise any issues, please do that. So where do we think the hope is and the positive aspects. Just anybody want to come back to me on that?
Well, I can see in the fashion... I've got my mic. I've got one on here. I can see in the fashion industry that there are pockets of good work going on, but the challenge is how to upscale those, and I think I can see that in a lot of other industries as well. So there's pockets of good practice going on. There are brands that realise that that they need to diversify their age imagery. There are pro-age campaigns rather than anti-age campaigns. These things are happening and they are out there, but it's still not the what I call the mainstream or tackling down that way. So there's a lot of, I guess, bottom-up activity in terms of small brands that are doing, sustainability in fashion really well. They get inclusivity in design. There's the Misfit project going on over there as well. So there are things out there where they are trying to challenge some of those moving into what the mainstream have been doing and moving into those spaces. But it's the escalation of that so that it becomes our default view. That's where I think the challenge is next.
I think there is optimism, for good reason and for bad in a funny way. I mean, I think in terms of workforce, we've got a great lever at the moment, sadly. The fact we have skills shortages and workforce shortages at the moment means that a light is being shone on the number of workers out of work, economically inactive, over 50, which is something like 27% at the moment. 27% of people over 50 not even looking for work, which is truly shocking and is damaging our economy. You can say it's a bad reason, but at least it gives hope that people might pay attention. I mean, we've, at Centre for Ageing Better, you may know, we've produced guides for organisations to challenge ageism. We've got the images that you talk about, and they are getting a huge level of demand. So that gives me hope. People actually want to change the way they're portraying older people. We've also launched a good recruitment guide for older workers, and we've got a number of employers looking and using that. And we are going to be launching a campaign to gather the country together on an age-friendly movement and challenge ageism. And we've already had a lot of encouraging support for that. We've had a lot of encouraging support for a new initiative where employers can show their commitment to recruiting and retaining and training older workers, because that's the other area where it's kind of lifelong development, which suits the individuals, but as I say, now definitely will suit the employers and the economy as well. So I think we wouldn't be developing things like that if we didn't have a level of optimism that things can change, because they have to change. We've got a climate crisis. We are beginning to join up departments. Why can't we join up in this country to say we have an ageing society? We all need to come together. Every government department needs to come together as well.
Could I just ask you an additional question, Carol, which is the role of older people in our campaigns and our age-friendly movement? I think the UK is one of the countries that has real issue with supporting older people's organisations, which isn't commonplace in some of the Scandinavian and Northern European countries. And I think placing older people and their testimony is really critical to do that. And I just wondered if other colleagues had any insights in how we can mobilise older people, as I think somebody said here, as influencers in the fashion sphere as well. What do you think?
I mean, you're a good example about age-friendly communities, of which we have now, I think, 58 in England and Wales. So it is beginning to happen. It needs to grow. When I arrived at the Centre for Ageing Better, I'd never heard of an age-friendly community. So I think it's both at a national and at a local level where people feel they can make a difference and that their voices will be heard, and putting mechanisms like age-friendly communities and a growing age-friendly movement that we're hoping to seed and work with many partners on, I think, will be absolutely crucial to that.
Yeah, the influences is really interesting because they're only influencing the people that are that they're reaching online. And as we know, with digital exclusion, there's a lot of people that aren't online looking on the Instagram space. And that's what I mean about there are some brands doing some things really well, and those brands are also on Instagram, but their customer base is very small. So how many of you knew of the Bias Cup before I mentioned it, the brand that I'm working with, right? Like these are, I'm talking about working with small brands, but how do you get Gucci, Dolce & Gabbana, like all the big fashion houses to change? That's something completely different. So influencers are interesting, and also what's also interesting is that is our response to them. So there has actually been research done looking at influencers and the backlash that they get for not maintaining standard fashion ideals. So as a doing social psychology, I know all about norms and what happens if you adhere to those norms, and what happens if you don't adhere to those norms. And if you don't adhere to those norms, you can get quite a severe backlash. So, and all of these things, you know, trolling and everything else happens online. So some of these influencers are under enormous backlash as well, which is kind of, you know, interesting that they're receiving that kind of level of interest. So some of them are changing attitudes, but also there's a huge number of people out there that don't want to see them doing their thing.
Yeah. Perhaps where do you think the hope for the future is on our agenda? How do you think things are going to change? Because I think they will do. I think it's how they're going to change.
I think they have to, don't they? Yeah. We're all getting older, and you know, you can be black or white, you can be man or woman, but we'll all age. So this is something you can't avoid. I think that there are 2 or 3 things that I'm observing in the UK, which you should be very, very proud of, and I think you're kind of leading that effort. One is a collaboration among different stakeholders. It is not happening in the US, and I can tell you it's not happening in Canada. So I think collaboration among the key stakeholders is absolutely critical, which then leads to funding. You know, when you go to David Cameron, ex-Prime Minister, you know, going after dementia, he's bound to generate, you know, excitement, and he's bound to generate some funding. The other thing is, I think we need to start thinking global. You know, I mean, UK is not the first country to be aging. Japan has been doing it for 40 years ahead of you and ahead of us. So what are the learnings from there? And when you hear that the CEO of Toyota is pruning trees in a park to keep busy, that's really interesting. And, you know, are we, you know, in the rest of the world looking at the situation as, oh no, well, you know, a CEO of Unilever or, I don't know, GSK would never do something like that? I mean, on a Friday, he was a CEO of X, but on a Monday, he's Joe. So I think that's the other thing. So I'm very optimistic, and I think the headway that you made in the UK, for you know, please do publicize, do share, and do extend it. And I think there's a global opportunity here. It's not just a UK or a you know, European opportunity.
And I think it's fantastic news that we're getting new leaders coming forward on this agenda. And I think leaders right across the different sectors is going to make the difference, I think, over the next few years. We've had a few questions. If I can read them out. There's a couple on fashion. I'll come to those in a minute. But there's one which I think is really interesting. This is from Tommy Parker. I don't know if Tommy's here or somewhere online. Tommy wants to know, how much do you think current services and tech aimed at healthy ageing contribute towards ageism? And he gives the example, tech in people's homes to deter falls, special exercise classes for older people, reinforce a level of inequality. Oh, where's he gone? And the ideas that they're not who they used to be, this adds to the idea that ageing is negative.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, isn't it? And I think, because goodness, we wouldn't want to argue against providing people with what they need, and it comes back to Victor's point about, you know, equalities and equity. But I argue too that it's really hard to find something that benefits older people that doesn't benefit everybody. So it may be that we need to think a bit more broadly about, you know, making adjustments to homes, which is something we're campaigning very loudly for at the Centre for Ageing Better, is better for people with disabilities. It's better for people with children. It isn't just better for older people. We are, as you say, we are ageing as well. So I think it's about having a responsibility to point out that that might have been your prime audience, but also demonstrate how this can benefit everybody else. And that comes to whether that be things or policy. because policy such as, I don't know, the one we've been hearing a lot about recently, increasing, retaining the level of pension, or keeping the triple lock on pensions, actually benefits younger people as well. Because if you don't have confidence that you're going to have a pension, you're going to have to be putting more money away when you're younger. So I only give that as an example that I think we have a responsibility not to portray older people as burdens, and that if we are investing, we are demonstrating how it benefits the whole of society.
What a wonderful way to end our session. We're out of time. I think we could have kept going for a long time. I want to thank our wonderful panel. If you can show your appreciation, please. My concluding remark is that if we're going to challenge ageism and make the difference that we want to, it will start in rooms like this. Everybody's got a role, so think about all of the things that you've heard when you get back to your desk tomorrow, your organisation, and we've plenty to look forward to. Thank you very much.